Well, good morning and welcome to Tuesday, the second day in our devotional this week as we're returning back to the story of Hosea. He's playing the role of a lifetime as he is living out the story of Yahweh, the God of Israel, and Israel, his people. And this is playing out in the relationship that he has with his wife, Gomer. And we are finding that just as Israel has been unfaithful and is reaping the consequences of her infidelity, this is also playing out in the anguishing story of the relationship of this family led by Hosea, whose very name contains within it the idea of redemption and salvation. So this is a reminder that God is always, no matter how difficult, tragic the context of a life is, God is always working towards redemption. That should be a comforting idea. Some people believe that God is constantly working towards damnation. You could ask most people on the planet today, and half of Christians, what God's motivations are and to what point and he is actually pointing and moving towards. What is he moving everything towards and why? And they believe that God is actually constantly plotting against them, depriving them of their happiness and satisfaction, and in order to impose a damnation upon their life. And that is actually the opposite of what's going on. What's actually happening is everyone is inexorably moving like gravity pulls an object downward towards the center of the earth. Everyone is moving towards damnation because of the results of the system of sin. God is constantly working to countermand that tendency to bring about redemption. And so we're going to see that played out as we turn our attention to Hosea. Hosea chapter 7, verses 15 and 16, closing out the 7th chapter today. I trained them and strengthened their arms, but they plot evil against me. So he has worked them out. He's developed them. He's put them through a weight training course and then helped them to train themselves. There's a training involved. God says, I trained them and strengthened their arms, but they plot evil against me. It's like the ultimate in betrayal. He has invested, poured energy, time, and effort into his people, Israel, and what happens? They plot evil against me. They're trying to push off or put off the claims, the relationship with God that's supposed to be at the core and the heart of that. He says they do not turn to the Most High. Here's that idea of repentance again, turning and returning. They do not turn to the Most High. They are like a faulty bow. Now, what would be the most obvious problem of a faulty bow? When you select a bow, there's a certain strength at which you have to pull that bow back. Compound bows have a different strength that you have to use because they fling that arrow at a greater rate of speed because of that multiplication force of the pulley, the rope and pulley system. And so it increases the magnitude of the force. And you pull that bow back. When you release that arrow, many times a steel bolt, it moves at high velocity, a high enough velocity to strike a deer and drop them if they're struck in a vital place. So a simple bow relies upon flexibility. That bow has to have flexibility in that wood. What happens if it's faulty? The faulty bow means you pull it back and then it breaks. It won't return. It doesn't have any desire to return back to its previous place. Elasticity is important, the ability to return to the previous place. There is something that I comment often about our country, America, and even I have observed this in churches. They go through things and they've lost their elasticity. I'm concerned that our nation has lost its ability and its tendency when it goes through a difficulty of turning or returning to the Lord, turning or returning to its original founding precepts. And that's something you can observe in a political system, in any system actually, is its resilience and its tendency to spring back to the place where it originally was. A faulty bow would tend to bow or bend and not return back to its original place. And this is exactly the analogy that Hosea is using about the people of Israel. They do not turn to the Most High. They are like a faulty bow. When they are pressed, when things happen, when the Lord is trying to get their attention, they stubbornly set themselves against that influence, and they lose their spring back, pull back elasticity. They don't return to the place that they originated. They are like a faulty bow. Their leaders will fall by the sword because of their insolent words. Insolence is talking about, it's a resistance. It's a braggadocio. It is a sense of magnifying oneself against someone in greater authority. So they speak insolent words, and for this, they will be ridiculed in the land of Egypt. So what is he saying? You're going to refuse to spring back. You're going to refuse to return. You're going to lose your elasticity. And when you stiffen yourself and resolve yourself against the Lord, and then it surfaces in your words, then you're going to find yourself exposed to the surrounding nations. You're not going to have the Lord's protection and defense. You're not going to have Him working on behalf of your redemption. And when you cut yourself off from the Lord that way, you are going to find your leaders will fall. They will be cut down by the sword in war. And you as a people will find yourself being mocked or ridiculed in the land of Egypt. That's where they came out of. They had come away from that prison and into freedom, led by the redeeming work of God. And they're going to find themselves back in that fiery furnace of Egypt. So what does that say to us? What that says to us is the Lord wants to work in our life. This is revealing how He works with nations and with people. And the key is that we have a springback mechanism, that we have a willingness to turn and return to the Lord. Because if we don't, we will set our heart against Him, and we will find ourselves in some form of captivity. Paul, I believe, put it, don't you know that whatever you yield your members to obey, to the same you become a slave. That's the long game that the enemy is playing, to appeal through temptation and other devices to something deep within us that would cause us to no longer spring back, turn back to the Lord. So whenever we go through a predicament, a situation, a test, a trial, whenever we mess up, whenever we sin, whenever we make mistakes, we're constantly confronted with, are we going to justify ourselves? Are we going to blame it on God? Or are we going to realize that somewhere in the middle of all of this, God is calling me back to Himself, and He can restore and renew, and He can work and help change and transform that part of my nature that would cause me to refuse to spring back, or would cause me to have a stiff neck where I wouldn't turn and consider Him. So as you go through your Tuesday, maybe that can be a prayer you lift before the Lord and something you can meditate upon in your heart. Lord, where's the places in my life that tend to make me a defective bow, where I don't spring back well, or where I tend to blame you, or where I tend to bail out, or where I tend to forget that you are working for my redemption, not for my damnation. So let that be our focus today on this Tuesday. The Lord bless you. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow.